Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Today, we have a special guest with us. And for those of you who don't know me, and I'll introduce Bob in a moment, my name is RJ Bianculi. I'm the managing director of Emerald Brand. And we conduct these webinars or Emerald Sustainability Accreditation webinars, usually once a month or once every 2 months on pertinent topics that are relevant and upcoming in the sustainability space. This one in particular is very significant. It's very significant because it's going to affect millions and millions of businesses in different states, and it's coming up quite quickly. And you know, when I first started looking at this, and Bob and I were looking at this years ago as they were putting it into legislation, it's amazing how there hasn't been much communication out to markets, particularly markets that are imminently affected by this ban on PFAS. So today we're going to give you a little bit of a background on what PFAS is. We're going to talk about the law. We're going to talk about alternatives that are going to be available that you need to make sure your vendors have available, and just give you an overall education. As with most of our webinars, they're relatively quick. This will be about 20 minutes, but will be very informative. And we will also have a Q&A in the last 10 minutes, so you can access the Q&A, and please ask any questions via the Q&A in your Zoom app. So with that, I'm going to let Bob Rossi give himself an introduction, and we'll get started with the presentation.
Thank you, RJ. I'm the executive director of the New York Sustainable Business Council, and we are a state-based, sector-agnostic business association. We work with businesses and business networks to advance a vibrant, just, and sustainable economy in New York State.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. And so we're going to go into a couple of slides. I'm going to cover the first few to talk a little bit about PFAS and what PFAS is. And then Bob's going to be elaborating on that, talking about the law and what's next to come. So what is PFAS? You may have heard the term before, or you may not have heard the term before. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's a fancy way, or a fancy chemical that essentially allows a particular product to be grease resistant or water resistant, so that whatever that coating is covering, it doesn't crumple up and melt or leak or have any types of those types of quality issues. So the chemical's been around since the 1940s, believe it or not. It is man-made, so it does not occur naturally. And what we did here, and I give credit to Bob on this one, which is interesting, he kind of shows the makeup of what PFAS is. And I'm not a chemist, but I do understand that it's a very, very tight binding agent. As you see, carbon and fluorine combined. What does that mean in layman terms? It's very hard to break down or break apart. It doesn't break apart naturally. It can't be metabolized. You can't, bacteria can't break it apart. So it's very difficult to get rid of, to break down. Where can you find substances that have PFAS, or you may hear PFOA, or different types of chemical components that are in the PFAS family? You can find them in a lot of different things that you use every day that you can see here, which is pretty interesting. A lot of folks may be familiar with the non-stick cookware, where it's very prevalent in, because it does have to handle very high temperatures, but it's also found in, you see stain resistant products here. And I think Bob's going to elaborate on this as well, but think like, your raincoats, your tent when you go camping, anything that's water resistant or grease resistant, more than likely has this type of substance in it. So what is this? How is this relevant to the food service space? And a lot of our attendees here are in the food service space, particularly on the coasts, which this law is imminently affecting in New York, California, but is also going to be affecting businesses in Connecticut, New Jersey. Bob will talk a little bit more about that. But oftentimes, and for years, much of the molded fiber types of products or food packaging products that are grease resistant have had PFAS or forms of PFAS in them. So this is just an example of some items here, Emerald items, that are PFAS free that don't contain PFAS, which we can talk about in the Q&A. I'm sure there'll be some questions on that after, that are compliant with the laws both in California and New York. They're FDA approved and all those good things. So they're PFAS free. There's no intentional PFAS in them. So this is just an idea, folks, of some of the things, particularly those of you in the food service space, that you see every day that potentially or more than likely have had or could have PFAS in them that you need to be aware of. I'm going to pass it over to Bob to talk a little bit about how these chemicals kind of leach into the environment, and then he'll go into the PFAS laws.
Fantastic. Thank you, RJ. One thing I want to mention is I didn't create that graphic, so but I forgot to label that came from, I believe that I grabbed that from the National Institute of Health's website. But it does show the sort of general one example structure. It's a PFOA chemical, which is in the class of PFAS. And that carbon backbone saturated with fluorine atoms just creates a really stable structure that creates all these properties that PFAS is used for, but it also makes it extremely persistent. So when we look at this graphic, it's just showing how the PFAS in food packaging makes its way into our bodies and into the natural environment, which also makes its way into our bodies. So the reason why the government's focusing on food packaging is because that quickly goes into our food, leaches into our food, and then we consume that food, and we cannot metabolize it. So it actually just slowly grows in levels in our body. As it leaches into the environment, it gets into our food and reaches us that way, as well as affecting all the animals. So next slide. So then how bad is this PFAS poisoning? It's pretty bad. There are increasingly just more discoveries around its impacts. It interferes with our endocrine system, with how our hormones are detected throughout our body, and that has lots of rippling effects. Obesity, cholesterol levels mentioned there. It has effects, reproductive effects in terms of fertility and effects on pregnant women, developmental effects in children, and increased risk of certain cancers. I could start listing them, but it probably wouldn't be exhaustive. It weakens our immune system, and that combined with the bombshell a couple of years ago of learning that it reduces our antibody response to vaccines at a very untimely time, is another part of what brought this into public view. But the list goes on. So I think this is enough to draw our attention to this. And so what this law actually does, well, first it goes into effect as this year ends. So it's in effect at the start of next year. And I'll just read here the wording: no person shall distribute, sell, or offer for sale in this state, and this is New York State, this is a New York law, food packaging containing PFAS as intentionally added. The second part refers to the definition of intentionally added is drawing from section 37, chapter 43 of environmental conservation law in New York. But basically it's there because PFAS is so prevalent that it is very likely that you could be making something and it just has PFAS contamination in it. So this is added not to soften the law, but to recognize that it is so pervasive in our environment. So California passed essentially the same law, and other states are in the process of passing Washington state's law. Washington was actually the first to pass it, but it was contingent upon a market assessment, and it goes into effect in February of next year. And I can talk more about other states. Next slide.
Great.
So how is it enforced? It is under the purview of the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and how it's regulated is, I'm not going to get into details around that because I'm going to quickly reach my limits of understanding of it. But what it essentially means is that come next year, if this law and regulation relates to your business, you must comply. Otherwise, you're essentially breaking the law. Your supply chain is your responsibility. There's language in that environmental conservation regulation around having to show that you've done due diligence and have some written, if for example, you're sourcing your food packaging, if you have an email saying that, yes, this is PFAS free, then you can use that to show that you're not culpable, you did your due diligence. So there are some checks like that, but you are expected to be responsible for how you're sourcing, as well as the supplier being culpable and the distributor. So don't expect, however, from the government a guide. As RJ was saying earlier, it's amazing how little public communication there was to businesses. Our government is just not set up to do that. It's part of the reason why organizations like NYSBC are around. So consult, like you're learning about it here, consult the early adopters who are already working to transition. We're all in this together effectively, and there isn't an advantage to keeping this information from each other. So communicate it to others, become a leader in that regard.
Great. Hey, Bob, I know someone's going to ask, I already see questions pouring in, which is not surprising, but I know somebody's going to ask what the fines are. I read somewhere in the New York State fine, I'm not sure about California or any of the other states, is $10,000. I'm not sure if you have per incident, but I'm not sure if you were able to find something else on it. But anyway, just
sure. I will just only add that it is up to 10,000, and for a repeat offense, it's up to 25,000.
Great. That's
for the offense.
Definitely helpful. Yeah, the folks are definitely going to want to know that. Awesome.
By the way, I don't see chat questions, so I'm going to rely on you to repeat them, unless there's a way to give me access to that.
Yeah, no, all good. We can go over that, at the end, but this is great. This is amazing information.
Okay, awesome. So the trajectory of this ban is pretty typical, and it doesn't always flow like this, but it is here. So there's a discovery process. In this case, scientific research uncovers the effects of PFAS, public awareness through various channels. The markets start to shift just through public pressure and demands for PFAS-free products of different types, packaging in this case. And government procurement often comes first. And I'm highlighting that in certain states. And I'm highlighting that because if you tap into that, one, if you're a company like Emerald Brand or a company that is distributing a product that New York State, for example, has in their green procurement specifications, you have a huge buyer there in New York State, which has a multi-billion-dollar procurement budget per year. But it's also in this trajectory to just sort of highlight that they can be a bit of a weather vane of what kinds of disclosure requirements or even bans in this case are coming down the pike for your business. Then state laws. We are a federal republic where states have their individual autonomy on some level. So states, in this case, New York, California, and Washington leading the way, and Colorado, Maine, other states following, New Jersey, who are introducing this legislation. So, and then often that happens first, and then, as is the case now, the federal government is looking at it. HR 6026 was introduced in 2021, November of 2021, so about a year, just over a year now. It is essentially the same bill. It was introduced by both parties, and it is a bipartisan bill. So from the looks of it, given the trajectory among the states, this is poised to move across the country pretty quickly and poised to be accepted, since it's a bipartisan bill and passed into law on a federal level.
That's very interesting. And yeah, I'm sure there'll be questions on what other states are looking to adopt these bans or have legislations. And Bob and I have some good information on that. And we could also talk about it in the Q&A. So please continue, Bob.
So we're looking at shifting markets, both in terms of this is what's happening, markets are shifting, and also we are empowered to help move this along. So just my recommendation is embrace this transition. There are opportunities to doing so. I've been involved. I used to work for a manufacturing company, and the sooner we got in on establishing our what materials we were sourcing, we were building skateboards, the better positioned we were when that market started to be saturated. So move quickly and be part of that early majority. Look at government procurement policies. I already mentioned that. You can, in some cases, in this case for sure, you can leverage and market your new compliance, your PFAS free packaged whatever goods. Show support for companies like Emerald Brand that are leading the way, and don't forget why we're doing this. It's not because of the government regulation, but we're working together to turn off the tap on essentially a poison to our environment and our people. And so everything we do individually makes a difference. So that's it for the general overview here. I'm again Bob Rossi, the Executive Director of the New York Sustainable Business Council, and I said earlier, we work to advance a vibrant, just, and sustainable economy in New York State. We work cross-sector, we're sector agnostic. We also work across a broad range of issues, from healthcare to transition to renewable energy. We do a lot in the toxic chemicals space. So if you have an interest in learning more about the kinds of work we do, then feel free to reach out. I was going to say I'll drop here. I will drop my info in the chat that I think is only going to you, RJ, and you can pass that on.
Let's take a look. Yep, to hosts and panelists, and I will send it out to everyone. And if anybody wants to contact Bob or the New York State Business Council, you can take a look at it in the chat. So thank you, Bob. That was great. And speaking of great, it was right on time, exactly 20 minutes. So, nice. We, as you can imagine, folks, there's a lot of information and research that's been done on this. And, Bob and I have worked very, very closely on this. And as he mentioned, look, we're a private, company, we're a business. Me personally, I'm not a big fan of regulations, but this is one that's good. And it's it's forced to drive innovation and critical thinking in our space and in other spaces. And it is something that is absolutely necessary. And it's important for us to keep you up to speed on what's happening in the space, not just now, but what's going to happen. So there's quite a few questions. I'm going to try to get to all of them. I'm not surprised that there are a lot of questions. So let's start with number one. And Bob, I guess we could bounce these off each other. Is there going to be any wiggle room I knew this was going to come for this ban for a food service operator, a grace period? As far as I know, and we've been in touch with the senator's office who's passed this bill. We're going to actually be doing some communication with them. There is, from everything I've read, there is no grace period or wiggle room. Bob, I don't know if you have anything different than that.
I'm gonna add just that I've been working to recently in leading up to this webinar to sort of understand how the DEC is interpreting distribution, because there is a definition of distributor, and interpreting selling packaging, so that I can, but from the looks of it, it includes if you're selling food with this packaging, then you're selling packaging. And that's something I just want to make clear that would give some defense to people in the food service industry. The other thing I'll add is just, this is my sense. I am not a decision maker in the DEC, but they're going, just from a practical standpoint, if you want to turn off the tap on PFAS coming into New York State, then you are not going to make much progress if you devote the already understaffed regulatory agencies to going restaurant by restaurant, when we have over 20,000 restaurants in this state, in the city alone, in New York City alone, and try to find them. I believe the DEC is going to be looking at the large distributors and the large companies that are bringing the majority of these products into New York State first.
Interesting. Well, that ties into another question we can kind of do two for one here. There's a question. I work for a paper company. We sell board that is used by others for food packaging. However, we normally do not see the end product. And Bob, we actually discussed this yesterday. How will this affect us being a middleman? And the way I interpreted this law is, if the state has a ban, if you're selling it into, if there's a transaction selling into a state that has a ban, then that business in the state that has the ban cannot be buying that product from you. I don't know who's liable. Would it be the out-of-state distributor?
Yes.
Or would it be the business that's procuring it in the state where PFAS is banned in that particular product?
I don't believe it's illegal to buy. I believe it's illegal to sell or offer to sell. And I'll clarify the offer to sell. I think that if you have something for sale, when someone enters, like online, if someone enters their shipping address, I believe you're required to recognize those states and say, sorry, we're unable to ship this to your state. Mm-hmm. But it's not illegal to buy. I believe if you go across the border, if you're in one of these states, buy it and bring it back, you're distributing it into your own state. I think they're trying to remove that seller side of it.
Aha. Interesting. All right, let's see if we can get to a couple of more here. When can we expect other states to adopt this ban? Can you provide us with an ETA by state going forward? I think what we can do, Bob, is we can send out to all of the attendees what each state and whether they have already enacted this ban. For example, like Connecticut has already enacted this, but it's going to be enforced in 2023. There are other states like Pennsylvania that have passed this law, but it hasn't yet been, it actually was effective July 2022, but it hasn't been enacted yet for whatever, political reason is going on there. So we have a list of that we can provide as best we can in terms of the updated laws. And if there's anything you want to add to that, Bob, please do.
No, I think that covers it. I think that might be, rather than rely on us to give updates, maybe RJ, you can share the link that I forgot the website we were looking at.
Yes. Yeah, there's a great law firm that has a page. I'll share that with all the attendees. That was well done.
Yeah. And also I should say that it's really, we can't give that timeline except when the laws are passed. Just having been in this game for nearly a decade now within New York State, and I know it's similar in other states, something could be run right up to, a bill can run right up to the finish line and then sit there for years.
Yep.
So it's we, until they cross that finish line and are then signed by the governor of the state, at that point we could start saying when it'll go into effect.
Yeah, fair enough. And obviously that's already happened in New York and California. So that's why we want to communicate this. We buy from many manufacturers of food service packaging, and no one has communicated this to us. Why? I think to the Bob and I have mentioned before, the communication on this is, let's say it's been below par. And, we see it as our duty to make sure we're not only communicating this to our customers and our partners, but to the broader community, because this is a pretty serious law, and it will be enforced. Will your slides be available to participants of the webinar? If you would like to access these slides, please email us. I put Bob's information in there. I'm putting my information in there as well. You could feel free to send us an email, and I'll forward it to the right folks at our organization to make sure that you can get this. Let me see if I can get to one or two more questions, because there are more. Let's see here. Slow down. Would I be breaking the law if I moved a PFAS product from a state that has this banning to a state that doesn't have a ban? Goes back to, I think, your seller. So that would be like, Bob, if let's say New York has a ban on PFAS, but I'm just New Hampshire doesn't. Can that PFAS product be sold from New York to New Hampshire? I would assume yes, but then on the back end, how was that product procured by the company in New York or made by the company in New York? Can you elaborate on that?
I would agree with you on that. So that's an interesting question. I will think on that and what other ramifications come from that. Yeah, I would have the same response that you just did, RJ.
Yeah. So I guess the answer to whomever asked that would be, technically, yes, you can. But the question would be is, how did that business that's selling that product in New York procure a PFAS product? You're not allowed to procure a PFAS product, and whoever sold that to you in New York is not allowed to sell that to you in New York. So you're not supposed to be buying it, and they're not supposed to be selling it. Let's see if we have one more. Will businesses be able to deplete their supplies of PFAS? And I think there was another question about this, people saying how do we deplete our inventory, and is there should be a grace period on this? Yeah, the bottom line is you've got to be working with your vendors very, very closely. We're your vendor, work with our teams very closely. We'll be, proactive in ensuring that you guys are procuring all the right products. And you got to, look, the bottom line is you got to start questioning your vendors and do it relatively quickly. It's my suspicion that some manufacturers and distributors will be up to speed on this. I can guarantee you there will be a lot of them that had no idea this law was even coming. Yeah. So it's, work very closely, both internally and externally, and communicate. We're always here to answer any questions as best we can. And make sure that our partners and our clients are in compliance. So we'll also look out for some additional communication coming out on this. As I mentioned, we're working with Senator Brad Hoylman and his director of communication on this, who was one of the sponsors of these bills in New York, and we'll be kind of amplifying the communication so everyone is up to speed. So oh, yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Just quickly on that previous interesting question. Looking at the law, it says no person shall distribute, sell, or offer for sale in this state. It's not saying sell into this state. So if you're selling it from this state, that still means you're selling it in this state. So I think, law's kind of funny, but it comes down to arguments. But I think there's a clear argument for saying that is still illegal.
To sell from a state that PFAS is banned to a state where it's not.
Yeah, I think you're still selling it in the state, even if your only customers are outside of the state.
That's very interesting. Well, we'll continue to dig into the law and provide communication and details out If there are any additional questions, please again reach out to us. Thank you all for joining. We had a great turnout, a lot of interaction and questions. I didn't get to all of them. I'm sorry, but we are out of time. And again, if you have further questions, reach out to Bob and I. Bob, thank you so much, and for all the work that you do. We all appreciate it. The industry appreciates it. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you, everybody.